this Christmas season, we've been going through and trying to observe and keep Advent, where we focus our hearts and minds on the person of Jesus and what he has brought into this world. Each week, we light a different candle. On week one, we lit the candle of hope as we thought about and reflected on the idea that Christ is the hope of the world to put us back together. And Mark Averill talked about how we should worship fully because we have hope in who Jesus is and what he's done. On week two, we lit the second candle, the candle of peace. We talked about how to have peace with God, away from the anxiety of consumerism and grabbiness and idolatry that comes from this season. We talked about how we can have peace if we spend less and focus more on Jesus. And this week, we light the third candle, the candle of joy. The third candle of Advent is the candle of joy. The candle is traditionally pink or rose-colored because those colors liturgically are related to joy. Sometimes the third candle is called the shepherd's candle, a reminder that Christ is our good shepherd who has come from heaven to earth to be with us, to walk with us through the valley of the shadow of death, and to lead us and to live with us as the Immanuel. He is the good shepherd who lays down his life for us, and that is a source of great joy. As we keep the season of Advent, we're also reminded that this is our 12th year of doing something that we at Westgate Church call Advent Conspiracy. This has been a dozen years of us taking this season of December, the weeks leading up to Christmas, and focusing ourselves on the person of Jesus. But not just doing that. One of the incredible things about Advent Conspiracy is at the end of it, we take a special offering. And for the last 12 years, that special offering, 100% of the funds that have been given by you go outside of our walls to dig wells to provide clean drinking water for people across the world. In the past 12 years, we have raised, as a church, $2.36 million. We've dug over 362 wells across the globe, providing clean drinking water to 224,000 people. That is just an astonishing number. Last year was our biggest Advent Conspiracy offering ever. $440,000 flowed in from you, providing wells, 54 wells we dug, providing water to 25,000 people. This is the hope of Jesus, that God's people, as we are infused with Christ, as we worship him fully, as we spend less, give more, and love all, that we can actually make an impact in this world for the sake of Jesus and his kingdom. And that's exactly through the past 12 years what we've been able to do. And that's why this Advent season is so important. Not just that we remember Christ, but that we look like him. So, this week, we're going to be talking about the third week of Advent Conspiracy. The first week, worship fully. Then spend less so that we can loosen the bonds of consumerism on us. And this week, we'll talk about give more. Now, you might think, give more. That means just give to the offering that's going to be received next week. And you would think that, but you would be wrong. In fact, this term, give more, is actually far more nuanced. And to understand it, we have to take a trip. We have to take a trip first to Thailand, then to Turkey, then to the Middle East, and then finally all the way up to the giant furniture manufacturer IKEA up in Sweden. Or is it Norway? It's Sweden. Anyway, let's go on a trip, shall we? First up, Thailand. We want to start off today with a story from Thailand. Now, for years, Thailand, formerly known as the Kingdom of Siam, which is in Southeast Asia, actually had this policy where the king, if he would meet with one of his governors or his precepts, one of the rulers of his kingdom, and he was particularly displeased, the king of Thailand would do something very unique. He would gift that governor that he was very upset with a particular gift of an albino elephant. Now, these were incredibly rare and sacred in Thai culture, and they were a gift of incredible value. But there were also terrible gifts because these animals were giant, somewhere between 6 and 12 tons, and they would eat between 200 and 600 pounds of food per day, which is roughly the same amount as a teenage boy. So this would actually bankrupt the person to whom the Thai king would give that gift to. Hence became the term a white elephant gift. This is where we get this term. It's a gift that's terrible, that is not helpful, and not at all what you want. In fact, it's the opposite of what you want. It's terrible. Even today, we have white elephant gift exchanges, and these often are really fun and really funny. Well, they're all fun in games until, for example, in 2012, when the Tish family wound up with a shake weight. We're still recovering. The point is, this is actually something that happens across the nation, white elephant gifts. And this is kind of an apt metaphor for sometimes what Christmas can be about. Dumb gifts given that we don't really need or want. This is the Christmas way. You go to Roxanne's Tchotchke Emporium and you pick up a bunch of junk that nobody wants, you wrap it up and you give it, and you call it Christmas. But I think that idea of giving gifts like that actually violates the spirit of Christmas. In fact, I would even say it violates not only the spirit of Christ, but the spirit of Santa Claus, or the person whom Santa Claus is based off of, the spirit of Saint Nick. Now, another name for Santa Claus is Saint Nicholas, and Saint Nicholas is actually a historical person. There's actually record of this man. His name was Saint Nicholas. He was actually a bishop in what's modern-day Turkey in a town, a port city called Myra. Now, Saint Nicholas was actually born to wealthy parents, but they died when he was young, leaving him a large inheritance, so he was quite wealthy. And now the stories that I'm about to tell, they're part church history. I mean, Saint Nicholas actually existed. He really was a bishop. But they're also part legend. He existed in a time during some real turbulence in the Roman Empire where records were kept on paper and there's not a whole lot of record of this. But there is some interesting part. These legends persisted through the ages. And the legend of St. Nicholas is this, that when he was the bishop, he encountered a family in his church where the father had fallen on hard times. He had 3 daughters, and because he could not provide a dowry, they could not get married. Now, in the ancient world, this was a big deal. If your daughters could not get married, if they didn't have a dowry, if you didn't have a dowry to set them up for a life with a husband, they actually could be sold. They could be trafficked. This was terrible. And so St. Nicholas wanted to help this man and his 3 daughters get married. But you can't, in the ancient world, you couldn't just give a gift because then the man would be beholden to you. So in humility and secrecy, St. Nicholas snuck into this man's backyard and threw a bag of coins through his window into the house for the first daughter's dowry. The next night he did the same thing, and there was much rejoicing. Well, the father was beside himself with joy. His daughters could now get married, but there was still one more daughter, so he stayed up late at night. And in that night, St. Nicholas crept in, threw a bag of coins, and it hit the windowsill, and then it opened and fell out into the 3rd daughter's shoes, which were drying by the fire. And that's how the story of stockings and shoes and coins and all that came to be. And this legend perpetuated. The point I'm trying to say is St. Nicholas delivered gifts. But what kind of gifts were they? These were incredibly important gifts. These were not trivial knickknacks or toys or games. This was St. Nicholas acting out of his generosity to provide 3 daughters with a future, with hope, with marriage. And he gave out of his deep and abiding love something that these daughters desperately needed. This is not knickknacks. This is not dumb gifts. This is the gift of real relationship, a future. This is a gift given out of somebody who actually knows and cares. And that's actually closer to the spirit of Christ, who came and gave us that which we actually needed. And it shows that the best gifts are the ones born out of relationship. St. Nicholas actually exudes the Spirit of Christ because he gives good gifts. In fact, you can make the case, an easy case, that in the entire universe, the best gift giver of them all is God himself. James, the author of the book of James, said that God is the author of every good and perfect gift comes from God above. And so this idea is actually relegated and teased out even further when God gives us the gift of Jesus Christ. The Apostle John, who wrote the book of John, put it this way. He said, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then John goes on even more to say, and this Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. The idea of God dwelling with us and becoming flesh is this incredible idea that John says is one of the most incredible aspects of who Jesus is and what he does. And it's actually a fulfillment of a promise in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 7, the prophet Isaiah writes this. He says, therefore, the Lord will give you a sign. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and we'll call him Immanuel. And the name Immanuel means God with us. The idea is that God wants to dwell with us. He wants to be with us. God gives us the gift of Jesus, and the very best thing about Jesus is that he is with us. This idea of dwelling or being with us goes all the way back to Genesis and goes all the way forward through the book of Revelation. It is God's great desire, his great hope is to be with us, with humanity, to have heaven and earth merged together back the way they were back in the garden when God walked with us. He dwelt with us in the tabernacle. That's what the text says, that God dwelt with his people in the tabernacle, in the temple, and then, of course, most fully with Jesus Christ. And then later, the Spirit of God wants to dwell in us. That's how close God wants to be. God wants to be with us. You could say that God gives us the gift not of presence, but of presence. That is a dad joke, and I am sorry about it. But it's the theological truth. God gives us himself. Jesus came to dwell with us. And the best gift that Jesus gave us, the best gift that God gave us, is the proof that God wants to dwell with us. Now, what does that mean and why does that matter? There's a million different ways I could try to explain this. There's a million different biblical ways I could try to show this. But for me, in light of 2020, I thought one of the most poignant ideas about God dwelling with us is actually from the Old Testament. I know that doesn't seem to make much sense, but bear with me. In the book of Daniel, it's the story of these three friends who are friends with a man named Daniel. Their names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Actually, that's not their names. Their real names are actually Hebrew names, but their identities have been stripped. They've been given these different names. And there's this king, King Nebuchadnezzar, who has conquered the Jewish people. The Jewish people are living in exile, and these three friends actually are living in exile underneath the king. The king desires to be worshipped, and these three men refuse to do so. And you might know the story. The royal people who are around King Nebuchadnezzar get jealous of these men because they refuse to bow. And they tell the king, and the king calls them in. And in Daniel chapter 3, this is what happens. Furious with rage, it says, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Then when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? This is the setup. If Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do not bow to these idols, to this king, if they don't worship him, they're going to be killed. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. These men have their allegiances set straight. Yahweh first, king and nation second. And of course, King Nebuchadnezzar's anger and fury and ego, they burn hotter than the hottest furnace. He orders his guards to turn up the furnace, and they throw them in there. And you expect, of course, that these men will be killed. In fact, the very guards who are escorting these men to throw them into the furnace are actually burned up because the fire is so hot. But then here's what happens. It says, the men wearing their robes and other clothes were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. Verse 22, the king's command was so urgent and the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. And then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there three men who were tied up and thrown into the fire? And they replied, certainly, O king. And he said, look, I see four men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the fourth looks like the son of a god. Now, Bible commentators and the early patristic tradition holds that this is what's called a Christophany, an early appearance of Jesus Christ. They believe that the fourth man in that furnace is Jesus himself, rescuing Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego from the fiery furnace and being with them. He doesn't just rescue them, he is with them in the furnace. Some of you need to be reminded that this is what the incarnation means, that this is an image of what Jesus does for his people. He is with them. The psalmist would write, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I have a shepherd with me who will not abandon me. Jesus even says, I will never abandon you, and I am with you even to the end of it all. Jesus is making a pledge of fidelity to us, not based on our own goodness, but just because he loves us that much. Jesus has proven that he will come into the furnace with us. He will walk with us no matter what life throws at us. And for some of us during this season, this 2020, it has been a hard year. It's been a furnace that has burned hot. A reminder, God has not abandoned you, nor will he. He is not immune to your suffering. He came down and got involved in it. And this is one of the great hopes and joys of the Christian faith, that God is with us, even in suffering, that he does not abandon us in the dark times, but walks with us through it. God is with us. But it goes even deeper than that. Jesus actually walked through his own furnace for our benefit, the furnace of the crucifixion, of taking all of man's sins and drinking them into himself, of being killed on a cruel cross, defeating the powers of sin and death, something that would cost him his life. And why did he do it? Well, the author says in the book of Hebrews, it was for the joy set before him on that Jesus endured the cross. The joy set before him. And what was that joy? It was us. That you and I might be united to Christ, cleansed and forgiven of our sin and able to be with God forever. That was his goal. And not just forever, someday, but right now, God can be united with us because of the work of Jesus Christ. This is a gift that surpasses all others. And if you'll notice, it's a gift of incredible relationship and incredible sacrifice. So what does this mean for us? I believe it means that we need to be better at giving gifts. That we don't just buy trinkets and junk, but that we are, like Jesus, giving people what they most need. And I think that that's actually us. If 2020 has shown us anything, it's that we need one another. And the best gift that we can give is ourselves, just as Jesus gave all of himself. He gave the gift of his presence. And if you don't believe the Bible and if you don't believe Jesus, well, perhaps you'll believe the giant Swedish furniture maker IKEA. A number of years ago, they had a bunch of kids come in and they asked them what they most wanted for Christmas. And they filmed this commercial. Take a look.
Venga, dale.
Bueno, vamos a escribir la carta a los Reyes Magos. ¿Sabéis ya lo que vais a pedir?
Sí. Este año me he portado muy bien. Un juego. Una guitarra. Una Wii. Esto y esto. Un unicornio que huele punta con punta.
Estas las dejo aquí para mandárselas a los Reyes. Y ahora vais a escribir otra carta. Una carta a vuestros papás. ¿Qué les pediríais a vuestros papás esta Navidad?
¿Algo más? Sí.
Vuestras hijas han escrito una carta a los Reyes Magos y esta para vosotros.
Queridos papás,
quiero que estés más tiempo conmigo, que hagamos más experimentos en casa.
Me gustaría que nos hagáis un poco más de caso. Me gustaría que cenarais más con nosotros.
quiero que me hagáis cosquillas.
Y que les leamos un cuento.
Quiero que estemos un día juntos.
No puedo.
Quiero jugar, mamá. Que juegues conmigo, vaqueros.
¿Quieres jugar más al fútbol conmigo?
¿Os sorprende que os pidan esto para Navidad?
Pues no, la verdad es que no nos sorprende. A mí no.
Tienen demasiados juguetes siempre. El sentimiento de tratar de sustituir, pues llenarles ese pequeño vacío con un juguete que les...
Pasar todo el tiempo que tenemos al máximo con nuestros hijos.
Pensar que tú quieres darles todo lo mejor y lo mejor eres tú.
Si lo está escribiendo, es porque lo necesita, ¿no?
Si solo pudieras enviar una de las dos cartas, ¿cuál enviarías? ¿La de los Reyes Magos o la de papá y mamá?
Uy, es una pregunta muy difícil. La de mamá. La de mis padres. Papá y mamá.
Oh, you got me, IKEA. Oh, you got me. Look, kids just grow up to be adults. And what people most want is you. It's what your spouse most wants. It's what your kids most want. It's what your friends most want. It's what your mom and your dad most want. The best, most priceless gift is time and time with those that you love. This Christmas, give more, not trinkets, not physical gifts, but give more of you, the thing that's the most valuable. This is what Jesus does. And let's not shortcut that sacrificial, costly proposal of giving more of ourselves by simply buying stuff and shipping it to people on Amazon. That's easy. What's hard is the tough, sacrificial moments that we give of ourselves to those that we love. This Christmas, give more of you. What does that look like? It means board games around the family table. In a time of COVID, I know that it means you might not be able to travel right now, but make a plan someday to go visit folks. Invest in the people as safely as you can in the time of COVID right now. And for those that are living in your immediate household, what they most need is you. Give the gift of yourself. Give the gift of dinners together, make dinner together, board games together, time spent together, family movie nights, just time together. And eventually, once COVID lifts, make memories by having experiences together, because that's what people most want. Can you do it all right now because of COVID? No, I know you can't. But let's begin to be people who give more, not gifts, more of ourselves, because that's what our kids, what our spouse, what our friends, what our parents, what those who love us most want. The most precious gift, as shown by Jesus, is time and time with those that you love. Let's not be lazy. Let's not be lazy this Christmas and simply substitute gifts for the most precious gift of all, ourselves. Let's give freely as Christ gave freely for the sake of love and the sake of relationship. And for the sake of IKEA. I'm kidding. For the sake of Jesus, who showed us the way. This Christmas, let's give the most valuable gift of all, ourselves.